Hi, welcome to Historical Legacies. Here, we dive into history's most intriguing stories, unraveling mysteries, and uncovering truths from the past. Subscribe to join our journey through time's greatest moments. Today, I will be narrating a short story on Franklin D. Roosevelt. This story comprises of 5 parts, followed by a brief introduction. Okay, let's start with the introduction. Franklin D. Roosevelt emerged as a transformative figure during one of America's darkest hours, championing hope and resilience through the groundbreaking New Deal policies. Tasked with steering the nation out of the depths of the Great Depression, he used bold and innovative approaches to reshape government's role in economic and social welfare. His presidency redefined leadership and cemented his legacy as a president who promised and delivered change in the face of overwhelming adversity. All right, let's begin with part one: A Nation in Crisis, the Prelude to the New Deal. Franklin Roosevelt took the oath of the office on March 4, 1933, at a time when the United States faced unparalleled economic turmoil. The Great Depression, ignited by the stock market crash of October 1929, had plunged the country into a financial abyss. Banks failed by thousands, wiping out the savings of ordinary Americans, while unemployment skyrocketed to over 25%. Industrial heartland sat idle, breadlines stretched for city blocks, and farmers abandoned their fields in the dust bowl. A brutal ecological disaster exacerbated by drought and poor farming practices. The national mood was one of desperation, with many questioning whether the democracy itself could survive such an existential crisis. Roosevelt's predecessor, Herbert Hoover, had been paralyzed by his adherence to fair economics. Hoover believed that government should play a minimal role in the economy, relying instead on private charity and local efforts to solve the crisis. This approach, though consistent with long standing Republican principles, failed to stem the tide of suffering. Public anger mounted as Hoover's perceived inaction deepened the sense of hopelessness. Tent cities known as Hoovervilles sprang up across the country, embodying the public's disillusionment with his presidency. Roosevelt's campaign capitalized on their climate of despair, offering Americans a message of hope and a promise of bold government action. His pledge of a New Deal was intentionally vague yet tantalizingly optimistic, signaling that he intended to chart a dramatically different course for the predecessor. His campaign tours displayed his extraordinary charisma as he spoke of the need for action, reform, and compassion. When Roosevelt took office, his inaugural address became a rallying cry for a wounded nation. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, he declared, challenging Americans to reclaim their sense of agency. With the weight of the nation's hope on his shoulders, Roosevelt immediately turned his attention to stabilizing the banking system, knowing that a foundation of trust was essential for recovery. This chapter in American history marked a pivotal turning point. The stage was set for Roosevelt to implement policies that would fundamentally reshape the role of government in the lives of everyday citizens. His New Deal would become not just a series of programs, but a philosophy of governance that redefined the American social contract. Okay, the next part, the first 100 days, laying the foundation. Franklin Roosevelt wasted no time in tackling the nation's most pressing issues, launching a flurry of legislative initiatives in what became known as the first 100 days. This unprecedented burst of activity began with the Emergency Banking Act, a decisive step aimed at restoring public confidence in the banking system. Just one day after taking office, Roosevelt declared a nationwide bank holiday, temporarily closing all banks to stem the tide of withdrawals that threatened to collapse the entire financial system. Within days, the Emergency Banking Act passed Congress, granting the government greater oversight of financial institutions and allowing sound banks to reopen. Roosevelt's fireside chat explaining the crisis reassured millions. And when the banks reopened, deposits exceeded withdrawals, signaling the return of public trust. The momentum from this success carried into key areas of reform. Roosevelt and his administration introduced sweeping programs to combat unemployment, stabilize agriculture, and provide relief to those most affected by the Depression. The Civilian Conservation Corps (CCC), one of most popular initiatives, put young men to work on projects such as reforestation, soil conservation, and national park improvements. The Tennessee Valley Authority was another groundbreaking program, bringing electricity, flood control, and economic development to one of the poorest regions in the country. Meanwhile, the Agricultural Adjustment Act (AAA) sought to raise farm prices by incentivizing farmers to reduce production, addressing the surplus that had driven prices to record lows. While controversial, this program was instrumental in stabilizing rural economies. Similarly, the National Industrial Recovery Act aimed to revitalize industry by setting fair wages, establishing labor standards, and fostering cooperation between employers and workers. Roosevelt's legislative blitz was not without opposition. Critics on the right decried the expansion of federal power as an overreach, while those on the left argued the measures did not go far enough. However, the sheer scope of the first 100 days showcased Roosevelt's ability to harness the power of government to enact rapid and transformative change. This dynamic leadership style and willingness to experiment set the tone for a presidency defined by action and adaptability. By the end of this period, Roosevelt had laid the groundwork for the New Deal, instilling hope and signaling to the American people that recovery was possible. Expanding the New Deal, bold reforms and controversies. Building on the momentum of the first 100 days, Roosevelt introduced a second wave of programs and reforms that significantly expanded the scope of New Deal. These initiatives, launched between 1935 and 1938, addressed structural problems within the economy and society, aiming for long-term stability and equity. At the heart of this second phase were landmark pieces of legislation like Social Security Act and the Wagner Act, which transformed the federal government's role in the lives of everyday Americans. The Social Security Act of 1935 became one of the most enduring legacies of the New Deal, establishing a safety net for the elderly, unemployed, and disabled. For the first time, the federal government took responsibility for providing financial assistance to vulnerable populations. Funded through payroll taxes, the program represented a revolutionary shift in public policy, creating a system that offered both immediate relief and long term security. Though initially limited in its scope, Social Security laid the foundation for future expansions of welfare programs in the United States. Another key achievement was the Wagner Act, officially known as the National Labor Relations Act, which empowered workers and strengthened organized labor. It guaranteed the right to unionize, bargain collectively, and strike, fostering a more balanced relationship between employers and employees. This legislation contributed to the growth of unions, which became instrumental in advocating for higher wages, safer working conditions, and fair treatment in the workplace. For millions of American workers, the Wagner Act represented a vital step towards economic justice and dignity. While these reforms earned widespread support among working class Americans, they also attracted fierce criticism. Business leaders and conservative politicians accused Roosevelt of undermining free enterprise and overstepping constitutional boundaries. The Supreme Court, in particular, became a formidable obstacle, striking down several New Deal programs as unconstitutional. In response, Roosevelt proposed a controversial court packing plan in 1937, seeking to add justices sympathetic to his policies. Though the plan failed, it marked a significant clash between the executive and the judicial branches and highlighted the tensions surrounding Roosevelt's ambitious agenda. Despite the controversies, the second phase of the New Deal solidified Roosevelt's reputation as a reformer willing to challenge entrenched interests. His efforts not only revitalized the economy but also addressed deep seated inequalities, laying the groundwork for a more inclusive and compassionate society. However, as the 1930s progressed, new challenges would rise, testing Roosevelt's leadership and the resilience of his New Deal coalition. Challenges and shifts. The later years of the New Deal. As Franklin Roosevelt entered his second term in 1937, the New Deal faced mounting challenges. While many programs had brought relief and recovery, the United States was far from economic stability, and critics on all sides began to voice their concerns. A coalition of conservative Democrats and Republicans emerged to oppose further expansions of federal power, making marking the beginning of what historians call the conservative coalition. Additionally, the economic down, known as the Roosevelt Recession of 1937 and 1938, exposed vulnerabilities in the administration's policies. The Roosevelt Recession was triggered in part by the government's decision to reduce spending in an effort to balance the budget. This contraction came too soon, undermining the fragile recovery and leading to a sharp rise in unemployment. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Roosevelt pivoted back to increased federal spending, initiating a new round of public works projects through agencies like the Works Projects Administration. These measures helped stabilize the economy once again, but the recession highlighted the limits of New Deal policies in achieving full recovery. Meanwhile, the political climate grew more polarized. The court packing controversy of 1937 had damaged Roosevelt's standing, even among his allies, and his inability to push through significant new legislations after this period marked a shift in the New Deal's trajectory. Many programs and reforms from the earlier years remain in place, but the ambitious spirit of the first 100 days and the second New Deal began to wane. Despite these setbacks, Roosevelt continued to advocate for policies that addressed the need to marginalize groups. His administration promoted housing reforms, expanded access to education, and advanced civil rights initiatives. Though progress in these areas was often limited by political and social constraints. As the decade drew to a close, global tensions began to overshadow domestic concerns, signaling a new chapter in Roosevelt's presidency. By the end of the 1930s, the New Deal had transformed the United States, leaving a mixed legacy of achievements and challenges. It had provided a lifeline to millions of Americans during a time of unprecedented hardship, reshaped the role of government, and introduced enduring reforms. However, the persistence of economic inequality and the slow pace of recovery demonstrated that the New Deal was not a panacea. All right, the last part, legacy and impact, redefining the presidency and America. The outbreak of World War II in 1939 shifted the focus of Franklin Roosevelt's presidency. But the legacy of the New Deal remained deeply ingrained in the American society. Many of its programs, such as Social Security, unemployment issues, and public work projects, became permanent fixtures of American governance. These reforms not only provided immediate relief but also fundamentally altered the relationship between citizens and the federal government, establishing a precedent for government intervention in times of crisis. Roosevelt's leadership style during the New Deal era redefined the modern presidency. He used the power of the radio to communicate directly with the American public through his chats, fostering a sense of connection and trust. His ability to rally public support and navigate political opposition demonstrated the importance of communication and adaptability in effective governance. Roosevelt's boldness in experimenting with policies, some successful, others less so, highlighted his willingness to take risks in the pursuit of solutions. The New Deal left a profound cultural impact, inspiring hope and resilience during one of the darkest periods in American history. Through agencies like the WPA, artists, writers, and performers found opportunities to contribute to public life, creating work that reflected the struggles and aspirations of ordinary Americans. The construction of infrastructure, from bridges to schools to national parks, provided not only jobs but also a lasting legacy of tangible progress. However, the New Deal was not without its critics or limitations. While it succeeded in alleviating some of the worst effects of the Great Depression, it did not bring about full economic recovery. Many historians argue that the massive wartime mobilization of 1940s ultimately ended the Depression. Additionally, New Deal programs often excluded African Americans, women, and other marginalized groups, reflecting the entrenched inequalities of the era. Even so, the New Deal set the stage for future reforms and expanded the American concept of democracy to include economic security and social welfare. It demonstrated that government could be a force for good, stepping in when markets failed and citizens needed protection. For all its flaws and controversies, the New Deal remains a landmark chapter in American history, a testament to Roosevelt's vision and the resilience of a nation determined to overcome adversity. Thanks for tuning into Historical Legacies. If you enjoyed this dive into history, please like, subscribe, and share. Join us next time for more fascinating stories from the past. Thank you.